Today our guest is Peter Rollberg, director of Institute of European, Russian and Eurasian Studies, and he is a specialist on cinema, and particularly Russian, post-Soviet and Soviet, and we want to talk about this new movie by director Zvyagintsev, which became a center of attention after it won the Golden Globe and became nominated for Academy Award. So, Peter, this is a very remarkable movie, and the director is very interesting. And previously, he did several movies like Return, Expel, and Helena, and he mostly deals with his movies with family issues, how the dynamic of relations between different members of the family. And this new movie that is getting more attention than others, it's dealing with that issue as well, but in addition with that, it deals with political issues of today's Russia, and we wanted to know what's your perspective on it, on this development in Zvyagintsev approach to the topics of his movies.
I don't think it's really a development. I think that The Return, his first great movie, that won the Grand Prize in Venice in 2003, and in a way symbolized the return of Russian cinema back to the global stage in the early 2000s, could be interpreted on a private level. And it was really about a father and authority and these two sons and the role of women. And so as a private story, it worked, but it could also be interpreted as a symbolic story, as a story about the return of the law, and it's a patriarchal law. And so when I first watched it, I thought this film has a political dimension, even though the discussion of it rarely, if ever, mentioned that political dimension. So when President Putin, after the success at Venice, actually invited Zvyagintsev to his home and had a several-hour meeting with him, I thought this is not just because this was a great success for the kind of rebirth of the Russian cinema, and Putin was aware of it and gave it credit, but also because the film must have appealed to him. And I heard that Zvyagintsev films do appeal to him. And I can see why, because there is a discourse on authority. It's not pro-authority, it just talks about the legitimacy or illegitimacy of authority. And the same is true for Leviathan, for this new film. Again, you can read it as a psychological drama because it's about a husband and his wife, and the wife is cheating on him. So it's really kind of an ancient story that has happened as long as human beings fall in love and marry and live together, and about bringing up the son, the children, all of that. But at the same time, it is also a parable, just as The Return was a parable, in that it is something that really applies to all ages and all cultures in some way. And so the case of Nikolai in this film is not just about a Russian man revolting against Russian corruption. It's that, yes. It's not just about a Russian man who is deceived by his wife and by his best friend, and who all destroy each other by this act of deception, but it is about revolting man as such. Nikolai is a man in revolt. It's a protesting man. And so while on the one hand this film is a very stark indictment of corruption in Russia, it's incredible, and it's incredibly explicit about that. And to me, Roman Madyarov, who plays the the corrupt official Vadim, is probably the best actor in this film.
Brilliant.
He looks as if he were a real person in this film, right? So he's just absolutely fabulous. But at the same time, it is also about this eternal law that doesn't care if we like it or not, that we have to respect or we will be crushed. And so, in a way, there's something very stern and I would almost say Old Testament-like about this film. You know, it has been interpreted and attacked as anti-Christian. It's not anti-Christian at all, in my view. It's actually very religious, very spiritual. It's about man's protest against the world order, which is unjust, and the futility of that protest. So in this regard, the film can be interpreted on a psychological level, on a mythological level, which has been done, but also on a level of parabolic storytelling, in that it's an eternal story of you know, Prometheus, of any human being who stands up against the gods, the presidents, the supervisors, their authorities, and loses in the end, right? And so I think American cinema itself has a number of great films that are in a similar vein. If you think, for instance, about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, the great Milos Forman film, about people who are forced to conformity, but then stand up and rise against it, and are destroyed as a result. This is an old and still always fresh and always touching and sometimes shocking film, as this film is shocking.
Well, you mentioned this very important discourse that the main character of the movie, Leviathan, he's a protester.
Yeah.
But for when I look at it and when I compare it to other Zvyagintsov movies, in The Return, the man, he is hard on his children.
That's right.
And he dies, so he's kind of guilty. In positive or negative way, I won't say it right now.
Right.
In Helena, as again, this old man, he refuses to sponsor his wife's children from other marriage, and she poisons him. So he does something. But in Leviathan, as I see it, yes, the main character, he kind of appeals to the court and loses and stuff, etc. But actually, he kind of fights, but then he surrenders, and at the end, he is ready to go away, but still the authority crushes him. And when Zvyagintsev was talking about how they were making this movie, he said that he deliberately avoided the direct protest line, because the first intention was that the main character would sit in a car and crush something, but then he gave up that idea. So as I see it, for example, the main character is not guilty of direct confrontation to the authorities. He has illusion that he can fight them, but as soon as illusion ends, as soon as he loses the support of his friend from Moscow and stuff, he gives up and he's packing, he's ready to go away. So I wonder if the director wanted to show that no matter what, if even you, at the end you are willing to give up, but if you're not, if you didn't do it at first or something, like, even if you're not guilty of direct protest, the state is so bad that it will crush you no matter what.
Or the law, right? The eternal law, the big law will crush you, right? I agree with you in some respect, and of course the big role of vodka in this film has to do with this kind of passiveness and acceptance, right? Which seems almost criminal. I mean, the fact that whenever there's a problem, people drink in response to that, it has been denounced as very Russian, and it has been denounced as anti-Russian. But to me, this is exactly what you were saying. It is this kind of passive acceptance of unbearable conditions and of the lack of rights for individuals that should be fought or that should be reformed, that are crying out for reform. But let me just go back to your first question, and then maybe I can synthesize the two in some way. Zvyagintsev's previous films all took place in some indistinct landscape. We couldn't tell, where is that? Is this in some Baltic place? Is this in France? And he the more money he had, the more he would shoot in various countries. So it became more and more indistinct, impossible to tell where is this actually going on, right? So in a very kind of general, eternal, parabolic landscape, could be anywhere. But then in this film, it is very clearly identifiable as today's Russia, right? So we have Putin pictures in the cabinets, in the offices,
in the north of today's Russia,
in the Russian north, right? At the same time, the film starts and ends with more indistinct landscapes, where you have these harsh, dark, gloomy seascapes with these naked mountains and rocks, in the sea, that are not moved by anything. So they were here a million years ago, they will be here in a million years, and here's our little life. And so it's, to me, this symbolizes the eternal versus the temporary. So the human affairs are temporary, including revolt, passiveness, fighting or giving in, suffering or being happy, whereas those eternal values are unimpressed by our human affairs, and that, to me, defines some of the harshness of this film. When people say it's too dark, it's too depressing, that's why. It does not offer any hope. It does not offer any tendency, not any solution. It doesn't say, "Oh, here comes the shining sun," or "Here's the reformer, the better politician," or somebody from Moscow who is able to bring a solution. No, this is how it was, it is, and it will be, right? And
even in political sense, when they shoot at these portraits of past leaders, they say that they will be shooting at the portraits of current leaders, but in the future, so it won't change.
Right. So it's really kind of a circular image of human existence, right? And in that regard, the film, while it is much more political and much more, let's say, polemical than The Return, but it's still of the same material and the same essence as was The Return and the films in between, right? So it can be seen, it can be read as an indictment of today's Russia, and this is I think it's an accurate reading of it, but at the same time, it also has a much larger framework which makes it valid for human existence vis-a-vis this unfeeling universe, this unfeeling space that doesn't care one bit whether we're happy or not, whether we're alive or not. And in this regard, Zvyagintsев, to me, is not so much a Western type director, but more an Old Testament director. He has very much the darkness and the depth of this Old Testament law, which is inhospitable to human affairs, which doesn't need our approval or our rejection. It's completely not Protestant. It's completely not Lutheran. It's exact opposite of it. And that's why the church, in a way, the Orthodox Church, is shown the way it is. That it represents that law that has no compassion for these suffering human beings, but says, look, this is the law. You have to give in. You have to accept it, period. Right? So compared to other religious approaches that say God is a compassionate God, he loves us, and so on and so on, and he rewards us for kindness and all of that. This is a much more, as I said, Old Testament image, of God with a cold, dark universe symbolizing it in this imagery.
So you said it's not a Western mentality movie,
No.
But still it is awarded by Western professional community. And why do you think they choose that movie, and what it says to the Western community?
Well, I think that the Western community, or the Western, let's say, civilization, has always been very open to other images that are not in accordance with its own values and with its own value hierarchy. So in the past, when you look at the winners at the Cannes Film Festival, there have been very harsh kind of Catholic type films in the 1970s, especially coming from Italy, that won the grand prize. You had more leftist films that had a more Hegelian, even Marxist underlying worldview. You have films from Japan, who are, for us, coming from a completely different, worldview. That is, we are probably very naive in trying to make sense of it, and so on. So I would say that in this regard, Western cinematic inclusiveness has space for this view of reality, for other views, and I also suspect that many people will interpret it in a political, critical fashion, this film, and they will say, look what a courageous film it is, and it is. It does have that. But of course it has another dimension which is a lot more shocking and a lot more, in a way, horrifying to our own more cozy and individual-centered view of the universe, right? And so, in a way, we could say the film shows the failure of individualism or of individual justice in a civilization that has no real understanding of it.
And in Russia, like in opposite, the movie received very bad, was criticized a lot by many people from different political spectrum, and which is very remarkable, because there are even darker movies which were received positively. For example, everybody's comparing Leviathan to this Bykov movie, Stupid, Durak, where the main character also tries to warn the authorities about this fallen apart house with 1,000 people, and then authorities threaten him to kill, and then he's beaten by the people he was about to save as well, which is as dark as Zvyagintsev movie. But why Zvyagintsev was so negatively received in Russia?
Yeah, I think there are several reasons for that. First of all, I think the feedback or the resonance was not entirely negative. I mean, there were many people who are impressed by the artistry, by the high artistic level of this film, and rightly so. I mean, this is a great work of art. I think that Bykov, Yuri Bykov is a great director, and if you look at his previous film, Mayor, that is much gloomier than Durak, and Mayor is really a hopeless film where even the death of a child is not changing any ethical perception of people. It's a much more hopeless and horrifying film than Durak. But I think that what irritated many Russians is that this film will now be seen in the world as a representation of Russia, and they don't want to be represented like that. And so when you think about films that previously were hailed as great Russian films, they all gave a more, let's say, humane view of Russia. So if you think about, for example, Bondarchuk's War and Peace that received the Oscar, or Moskva slezam ne verit, Moscow Doesn't Believe in Tears, 1979, which received the Oscar.
They're very optimistic.
They're very optimistic. Or even if you think about Burned by the Sun by Mikhalkov, which is also a relatively dark film, but it still is a much more compassionate film, and has a lot more hope inside of it than this film. So I think that the gloominess of this film is something that Russians don't want to accept, or many Russians don't want to accept, and so they view this more as a denunciation, or they call it chernucha, which means to really paint everyday life in the darkest possible colors. Whereas to me, this is a real great parabolic film, a great mythological film, whose validity goes far beyond today's situation in Russia. If it were only that, then this wouldn't be a great work of art. But it goes much, much further than that. And I think especially in the imagery, if you think about the choice of this harsh landscape, the way this landscape is presented, and where the house, which is meant to protect the main character and his wife and his son, is also destroyed, right? So the house is a temporary thing that also doesn't hold. It doesn't hold up. It is destroyed. You can see it from the inside how it's
Yeah.
crushed. And so I think once this dimension will be become more clear to discriminating viewers, they will understand what a great work of art it is. I would relate it more and compare it more to Bergman's film, Ingmar Bergman's films from the 1960s, Silence, for example, and several others that are a lot more pessimistic, and of course human affairs don't look particularly appealing in them, and that's not the purpose. Or Swedish society doesn't look particularly favorable in it, but it's really about human existence per se, and man's fallibility, and that makes the film a lot greater than just a sociological study. It is not a it is a sociological study, yes, on one level. It is political criticism on another level. It is a psychological story also on one level. But for me, the framework that counts most goes a lot farther than that.
Well, and the last question is, this movie is recognized, and actually there is this perception in Russia that there used to be great Russian or Soviet cinema in the past, in spite of ideological
Yes.
side of it, and then it kind of degraded during 19th. And can we say that Russian cinema now is up to international standards, and Russian cinema is back on international stage?
Well, I would say that you have to distinguish commercial cinema from non-commercial cinema, and I would say that in the realm of artistic non-commercial cinema, Russian cinema has never completely faded away. It has never completely died. In the 90s, there were a few masterpieces, for example, Musulmanin, the Muslim, which was a great film, 1996. Several others, real wonderful, low-budget masterpieces that were hardly seen by anybody. And in the 2000s, when more money went into Russian cinema and the Russian cinema industry, we have even higher budget masterpieces. So I would say on the non-commercial dimension, there have been, and there still are, every year, I would say between 3 and 10 genuinely great films. The fact that people don't watch them as much anymore has to do with the dominance of commercial cinema, both on TV and in the movie theaters. So that you cannot really hold against Russian cinema per se. But I would say, the best traditions and the best achievements of pre-Soviet, Soviet, and non-Soviet cinema, so to speak, non-political cinema from the 20th century have been kept alive, and I think Russian cinema still is a very powerful one. And the fact that people around the world know less of it has to do with the precarious state of non-commercial cinema everywhere. Basically people watch it on festivals, and then maybe if they have friends who also like good movies, then they watch them in small art house cinemas, or on DVD or on YouTube. But Russian cinema shares this fate with French art house cinema, with Italian art house cinema, Swedish, what have you, and so it's not distinct. But it's alive, and I think it's very powerful. In times of crises, political crises, the Academy often looks very favorably at Russian movies. So you had 1968, the Prague Spring, and they picked War and Peace. You had 1979, the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets, and you had an Oscar for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So you have this kind of strange sympathy of the Academy of Motion Pictures.
But the Bondarchuk's movie, it's not like everybody was there, like Tikhanev, everybody.
Well, but it's a very patriotic movie. It's a very patriotic film. Yeah. It's much more patriotic than the novel.
Yeah.
So.
But it wasn't like something anti-Soviet or something.
No. What I'm saying is that it's strange. Normally, you'd expect that at a time when the Soviets were particularly aggressive, that people would ignore them.
Yeah.
So now that Russia is more aggressive than before, in international politics, you would expect that people. But no, the film community, and especially the Academy, looks at films like this. There are many good films.
Yeah.
So Leviathan isn't the only one. There are probably 25 others that would deserve to win the Oscar. But they look more favorably in this Russian film right now, in this situation where everybody, is at odds with Russia, but they somehow single out a Russian film. The same happened in '79. Yeah. So this is a strange kind of counterweight culturally to international politics. The situation.
Because it's like on a news headline.
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know why there is this. This sympathy for Russia. I have no idea.
Maybe not for Russia. For example, the movie by Ben Affleck, about Iran. I don't know. I can't judge from the professional standards, but I didn't thought movie was great. But still, it got Academy Award, and I thought it was political. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
No, it doesn't work with Iran. I mean, because Iran has also a very interesting film culture and has had an interesting film culture for the last 20 years or so. And yet, their films do not enjoy the same kind of protection or sympathy as do the Russian films. I don't know why that is. I'm just saying it's weird that this is the case. So somehow, international situation is not in favor of Russia, but a film is chosen for the Oscar. So I don't know why that is. So yeah. I do think, though. I mean, I don't know whether you've watched Tangerines, the Georgian Estonian movie.
Yeah, no.
Mandarini.
No.
It's available on YouTube with subtitles, but you don't need subtitles. That's a very powerful film. It's one of the 5 contenders.
I'm gonna watch the Musulmani you mentioned.
Oh, that's a beautiful film. Musulmani. That's a beautiful film. 1995 or 1996. It is. That's a real indictment of Russian society, not in the same kind of harsh manner as in Zvyagintsev, but on a more everyday level, really. So because it's about this young man who fights in Afghanistan, who is captured, comes back a Muslim, and he no longer can live in his Russian village, and this village is shown as completely immoral. It worships the swine, literally, So in his nightmares he sees this big pig head, because everything is about food, is about lust, it's about drinking, and so on and so on. It's a very, very powerful film. Musulmani. It's a masterpiece.
Well, thank you very much for
Thank you.
the review.
Thank you.